Ladies and gents, boys and girls, my name is Fatemaa Waariithah Ahsan, and I'm a lawyer and founder of No Passport Voice, a non-profit organization based in Bangladesh. We all have been going through personal and professional crises during this unprecedented times. The biggest challenge faced by the education sector has been to provide education to the millions of students during this global pandemic situations. Promoting education at all levels has been one of the mandates of our organization, No Passport Voice. And I take the privilege to join the global celebration of International Literacy Day on behalf of No Passport Voice. And this year, the theme is literacy, teaching, and learning in the COVID-19 crisis and beyond, especially on the role of educators and challenging pedagogies. As an opening remark to our celebration, we have a very special guest who is an experienced educationist speaking to us in celebration of the International Literacy Day 2020. We all have that one person in our lives who make a lot of difference. And in my life, she has been an inspiration. She's one of the persons who have had a huge impact in my life. She's my mentor and a guardian angel. She's an experienced lawyer, a solicitor, an academician, and more importantly, an inspiration to many. She's a senior lecturer in the law department of London South Bank University and also runs a module on EU criminal and migration law, which is run jointly with several partnering universities across Europe. She was LSBU's lead academic on the Erasmus-funded strategic partnership Inspired, in which academics from 6 European universities collaborated to design an MOOC on transnational criminal and migration law in Europe. She's also the Erasmus coordinator in the law division at the School of Law and Social Sciences, a point of contact for Erasmus and study abroad students. Her particular interests are the English legal system, the first-year student experience, student mobility, the internationalization of the student experience, and its contribution to global citizenship and European law. She has delivered conference papers and published journal articles on these topics. Before joining London South Bank University, she taught with the Open University. She is a qualified solicitor and has worked over a number of years in commercial litigation in large city firms. Academically, she holds an MA in Classic from Oxford University, an LLM from University College London, and a PGCHE from LSBU. She is a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. In 2017, she was awarded a PhD from Birkbeck, University of London, on the contribution of Erasmus student mobility to EU citizenship. Her theses formed the basis of her book, Citizenship, Nation Building, and Identity in the EU, which was published by Routledge in 2019. Please join me in welcoming the brilliant and the very inspirational Dr. Cherry James.
Fatemaa, what a lovely welcome. Thank you very much. And I feel extremely honoured to be with you today and to be with you in the virtual way in which we are with people, with so many people who you have involved in your absolutely wonderful and inspired charity, No Passport Voice. So I feel very honoured to be with you and to be talking to so many people. And I would say that I am very touched by the accolade you give me, and I think that you are yourself an inspiration to many. So let's hope that inspiration spreads outwards and becomes the gift that it is to so many people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cherry James. First of all, I would like to thank you and extend my personal gratitude to you for agreeing to do this with us. We really appreciate it. And I think as a starting point, I think I would slightly take you down the memory line and would ask you if you could tell us how has been education during your time while you were growing up. And education is something which has evolved over the years. And I'm very interested to know about your childhood and how has the impact of education been during those times?
I was never in any doubt that education was given a very high priority by my parents. My mother was a primary school teacher, although she didn't work very much when me and my sister were very little, but she had worked before we were born, and then she started again when my sister, who was younger than me, went to school. So there was never any doubt that education was an important aspect, an important thing in our lives. And our father, although a very traditional man, was never in any doubt that educating his two daughters was just as important as if we had been sons, and put a very high priority on ensuring that we were at the best schools and that we worked hard and that we were given all the encouragement. I learnt to read. I was very lucky. I was encouraged to learn to read well before I started formal school. I suppose having a mother who was trained as a teacher was an advantage, but I have very early memories of being taken to the library in the small town in southwest England in which I grew up, and of being astonished that there were these shelves and shelves and shelves full of books just for children, and that we could sit there and then I could borrow some and take them away, and whichever they were, and bring them back the next time, you know, a couple of weeks later or whatever. I still have very happy memories of certain of my childhood books, and I've just I was thinking over the last few days, what do I remember of my favourite childhood books? And I remember from when I was very little a picture book about Orlando the Marmalade Cat. Yes. Which fits in with the fact I've got cats now. I was brought up with cats, and it had lovely pictures, and I was very pleased when my own children were born to find it was still in print, so bought them several copies of that. And I remember my mother, if I was unwell or in bed or something like that, she would go out and buy me a new book to read to me, or to read with me, or for when I was a bit older, for me to read by myself. And that was an enormous comfort. So I was fortunate in that I was encouraged from when I was a small child to appreciate. I don't suppose I thought about education as such, but looking back on it, that was what was happening. I just grew up in an atmosphere where we were encouraged to read, where reading was a treat, where we were read to when we were little, and if we went on holiday, my mother would usually buy us each a new book or two, so we had something to look forward to on holiday. And so reading was always a great pleasure, I think.
Yes, I resonate with you on the fact that the role of parents and guardians and the caregivers during a child's growing up age is very important. I also have a similar story because we are three sisters. I have an elder brother, and after him we are three sisters, and well, education has been the most it was on the top of our priority list, of my parents' priority list. As you would already know, all my sisters, like all of us, are lawyers, and we've been educated in England, and this has been really practiced at our home, that, you know, we had everything, we had all the privilege, we had all the liberty to do to practice culture, or to learn a different language, or learn an instrument, but at the same time having the academic background was very important to all of us. And like, if I asked you about your childhood, because you and I definitely come from generations apart, but I would also I think I relate to you on the fact that even in my childhood, I was exposed to a lot of storybooks. So I used to have bedtime storybooks, which I would read, and then my elder sister would read out stories to us. And there's a difference in your personality when you actually grow up reading books, because I do feel it's not the same if you're reading online, or now kids are more exposed to visual reading, or, you know, the videos and stuff online. but I do really connect to the traditional way of studying and traditional way of practicing education. But at the same time, I absolutely love technology. I mean, technology has brought us so close to each other. Like, I really feel technology has made a huge difference in our lives because it's made the world really small.
Yes, yes, certainly. I think and I think that one has to recognize the power of technology. You can have the stories and the books on there, but I think if children just use it for visual effects and animated games, then I'm sure that, I mean, I can't say that that's something that I engage with, but I'm sure that it is all very entertaining. But I think there is something about the written word, in that you have to use your imagination. You then visualize the scene which is being depicted. You then decide what the person who is being described to you is really like. They're not just there for you. It develops your imagination, and you relate with it. Yes, that's right. They become much more, you become much more involved with them. So I think, yes, the world has changed hugely. I mean, when I was a child, I remember the father of another girl in the school was brought into school one day to show us what was called a small computer. And frankly, it was an adding machine. That's all it was. It was little more than a kind of the thing that adds up the prices in the shop, if truth be told. But we all sat round in the hall looking at this, and we were told that this was the future. And really, that had no meaning whatsoever. It just looked like a rather dull machine to us. But that was the nearest that we had to a computer or the online world. And it wasn't until I was, much older and had left university, certainly for my first degree, that there was the World Wide Web and actually access for normal people to material online. And the world, of course, has changed beyond all recognition. But I think probably we have to recognize that it's not one thing actually pushing another out of the way. There is definitely, I agree with you, I think that there is a role for the printed page, and there is also a role for the online world. And it would be a tragedy now to lose either of those. And I think that it's probably very important that we take connectivity for granted, and connectivity in the online world is becoming much more widespread, but it isn't universal. And the last thing that we would want is for anybody who doesn't have ready access to the internet to feel that they are disenfranchised in any way. I mean, really, the title of your organization touches on that. And whilst I'm sure online connectivity will go on being rolled out, and mobile technology is probably much more available even for people who perhaps don't have the internet and laptops and that kind of thing as such. Nevertheless, there is still a role for the physical printed page, and children can learn an enormous amount from that. And old-fashioned books, or newer books, just somebody who cares for them, reading to them in the simple, time-honored, old-fashioned way is such a gift and is such a start, whether or not that person has online materials or a computer to share with them. So I think there's a role for both. The life has changed enormously since the advent of the online world, I suppose. But as I say, it's important that people for whom the access is not as easy as it is for us do not feel that they are left out. They mustn't be, because they have a right not to be, and because it is an addition. It's an enhancement. It is not a replacement, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think we all agree to the fact that there has been so much of changes in just not in the education sector, but in the whole economy of each nations through the practices of information communication technology, where ICT is extremely important to run any business or to run any education institution at the moment. So I would like to know from you, how has teaching been at university levels during this global pandemic situation?
Well, that's obviously, it's a very interesting question. Of course, when we were locked down and classes had to stop in the UK, that was really mid to late March. We were nearing the end of the academic year's, the teaching timetable. Yes, there were a few more weeks, but it was probably rather different from if it had been, say, in September or October when we faced most of the academic year. So we moved very quickly. And initially, of course, there were no plans. Everything had to be decided very, very, very quickly. But what we, at our university, what happened in most universities really, was that we went on to video conferencing for teaching. What we did for, at least that was for the smaller groups. If you had a smaller group of students, possibly up to 20 or so, you could just about manage on a video conference call. It was not straightforward because not everybody knew how to use these. We've all become much more familiar with them over the last few months, but even so, there's still quite a learning curve. For a lot of people, it was the first time they'd ever used anything like that. There's always the problem that even in London, not everybody has actually a terribly good internet connection. So some people will be able to access what's going on much more easily than others. So you have the concern there that inequalities can very easily be magnified by what is going on. I think for university students, they just about coped with that sort of thing. Sorting out exams was a major problem because normally you pack, a huge sports hall perhaps full of exam students, and when you've been told that everything's got to be closed down and nobody's to go out of their house unless for essential exercise and shopping, you cannot suddenly invite hundreds of students onto campus to sit in a room together. That manifestly is completely impossible. So there was a massive amount of work to change what would normally be traditional exams done in a big room, invigilated under timed conditions, to some sort of realistic final assessment that students could do online, either in their own time and then submit it by a deadline, or actually do a timed exam, but do it online and just be trusted, frankly, to just to do the exam themselves and with all that entails. I think we were probably luckier than schools because at least all our students would be expected to have access to a laptop or at least a tablet, something like an iPad or equivalent. And in the law division now at South Bank, we actually equip all our students with an iPad or tablet. So at the very least, they will have that, and a lot might have a laptop as well. I think just to compare our situation with school children, one of the problems with school children is that whilst some may have that kind of equipment, not all will. And there was a lot of concern, certainly in this country and probably in others, that some families may have one computer or tablet between the whole family. And then you had perhaps mother and father who needed it to try to work from home, and you had several children all trying to access school work on it. And so that's a major issue. That was a problem. That was one that I think, as I say, at universities, because the expectation is that everybody had their own device, we didn't have that particular problem. But certainly amongst school children, again, you get the problem of the magnifying of inequalities, because the better off children will all have their own equipment and won't be sharing it with their siblings or with mum and dad. But you know, that's been a real problem that of lack of provision, I think. Yes,
I think it's an irrefutable fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has put millions of children and families in difficulties, and I think there were several reasons for which many students across, I think it's just not in Western, like just not in developing nations, but I was reading some research and reports where actually millions of students across the globe have missed out on vital learning over the last 6 months. And these students are usually those who are from maybe marginalized community, those who are struggling, vulnerable children, and those on free school meals, and children with disabilities and special needs, and children from homes where probably information technology is poor or entirely lacking, and so on. It's kind of a wake-up call for the world that this global pandemic has affected just all over. It's just, it doesn't matter if it was in a Western country with better resources or with a developing nation with limited resources, because in Bangladesh we have had national closure of school institutions and actually businesses as well from March, and the government has worked pretty well in providing ICT education through ICT, and there were televised education for the students who follow national curriculum. We would probably be having a normal life again without the panic and without the pandemic situation. But I think it doesn't change the fact that there are so many limited resources around the world, and it doesn't change the fact that there are so many limited resources around the world. And I think nations who can give the IT support should be opening their, limitations and helping out to those who are in need, probably in a nation who has limited resources, in providing laptops or smartphones to marginalized communities. And I think there are obstacles, and at the same time, probably you would be able to tell us more on the obstacles that educators face during this testing times. And I think there were lots of news from UK as well, where parents were complaining, where I'm sure teachers were struggling to provide online education. So I would like to know from you that what are the main obstacles that they face during this testing times during online teaching?
Well, I think to start with, I think one has to bear in mind that obviously there are the practical issues which I'll come on to, but that this time has been a time of terrible fear and of the unknown. I still cannot quite get my head round the fact that this time last year, we had absolutely no idea that this was going to happen. Even at the beginning of this year, in January, it was just all starting, wasn't it? January, February, but how much the world has changed. And when I think about that, it is the most shocking and dramatic event. It's more than an event of my lifetime. I am pretty sure of that. So I think one cannot underestimate the effect of the fear of the disease, of the fear of the unknown, of the fear of the economic impact of people losing their jobs, or being worried about losing their jobs, or being worried about not being able to pay their rent because they can't work, if their job is such that you cannot continue it when the world is locked down, and there really are an awful lot of jobs like that. And so that's a backdrop. Now, from our students' perspective, clearly some of them will have been working as well to help support their studies. And some of them I know have therefore been in financial difficulty because of not being able to do whatever their generally part-time work was. That's obviously not the case for everybody, but you had all of that, and one had the backdrop of some people just being ill. I mean, I know some of my students actually got COVID. Fortunately, none of them appear to have been, permanently disabled or anything like that. They seem to have recovered, but nevertheless, it's an illness. And with any new and unknown illness, you don't know how long you're going to have it for, and you don't know how badly you're going to have it, and you have to wait till you get better. So there were those the backdrop is just still the fear, and I think everybody still feels that they are walking on a very shaky ground, because we really don't know how long this is going to go on. And I know when I started, when this all started, when we were first locked down in late March, I remember attending, as it were, an online meeting with various other university lecturers from different universities. And one of them from a different university said, well, we've all been told to start preparing our materials for the September term as though we're going to be teaching online. And I was just astonished, and so were other people. You mean that this is all still going to be going on in September? No, surely not. And yet here we are, and we really have no idea how long this is going to go on, but it certainly is going to go on. So you have that is the sort of the backdrop. I think then it was the suddenness of having to change and learning how the new technology, and thinking very quickly, literally each week, what was I going to do? How can I deal with this with my students? Certain activities I was going to do as groups in class. Well, that won't work. How does this work? And just having to sort of think from day to day, well, certainly from week to week, what do we need to do, and try to keep it to a manageable minimum, knowing that some students are either going to be ill, or we're going to have family who were ill, and we're going to have other concerns. And so you try to reduce things to a simple minimum. I think the other thing, so that's a sort of at a practical level. I think at a more human level, I think the very important thing to bear in mind, and this hasn't changed, is that we need to stay connected, and that an awful lot could be achieved simply by speaking on the telephone or through Zoom or whatever to students, or even communicating by email if that's all they could manage, and saying, how are you coping, both psychologically and with your studies? Is there anything I can help clarify? How are you? And virtually all of the personal emails I have had with students would include, instead of just being about, well, if we're doing this topic, then don't forget this, and there's a good chapter on this, and you can read this, and the practical advice. They want to know that I'm all right. I want to know that they're all right. And so there is that, genuine concern. Are you all right? Is your family all right? Etc. And I think that the importance of that sort of human connection can never be overplayed. And when you meet somebody, if I meet a friend in the street, a neighbour in the street, obviously this is at the forefront of all of our minds. How are you? How have your family been? Are you all right? Do you need anything? Is there anything I can do? And looking on trying to get some sort of bright side out of this pandemic, which is quite hard. You have to, I think, probably try to appreciate the emphasis on the concern of one human being for another, and the importance of that. And that's important at a human level, whether you're involved with them in educationally or not. It's certainly important when you're involved with the education of somebody. They cannot flourish unless they know that you are concerned for them, and you genuinely are. And so I think that that importance of just small time concern, expressing that concern, and also being honest about the fact that we we're not experts in online learning. I'm got more expertise than I did in March, but at the end of March, you know, I was no more expert than any of the students. And just honesty, being honest, you know, we're learning this together. Forgive me when it goes wrong. I'm probably doing something wrong. I'll do my best.
Yeah.
And if you're honest, then most people are understanding.
Well, I think empathy is something that comes very naturally to you. I can say it like with conviction and with all
That's very kind.
honesty.
Thank you.
And I have actually embarked into this new journey of teaching this in this pandemic session. I've been teaching law, gender, and international human rights at Asian University for Women in Bangladesh in Chattogram. So yeah, I mean, I have actually been remembering your way of giving support to a student, and I think in this time, this was my first having been actually connected to students who are doing undergraduation. And one thing that I have noticed, it's also because I was mentoring some students, like some students from South Bank was also emailing me, all thanks to you for the connection. So I love doing all of that, but at the same time, I was really feeling for these graduates, especially the ones who are in their final years, because they're really concerned of their grades. And I think this is something also which had a huge impact, because this whole global, the pandemic situation has made everybody very panicked, and everybody was in a lot of anxiety. So some of the students were really worried about their final grades, because probably they'll be graduating in a month or two, and their whole career, their job prospects would depend on the grade, on the final year grade. So I do agree with you that, yeah, there's been, I think during this, if you honestly just looking after each other, or at least asking about how the other person is, it does make a huge difference during this time.
Yes, yeah, it certainly does. And you're right. The we have to be particularly sorry for those who finished their education during this time. You know, they were expecting to finish their teaching, to do their final assessments in May to May, June, and to get their results of all their hard labours in July. And then, because as you know, in the UK, we have our graduation ceremonies are a very important way of bringing closure and celebrating the achievement. And we would have been looking forward to having those graduation ceremonies in October. As it is, the students that as I've explained, we did have to put in place quite hastily some alternative arrangements for exams, so they did get, they were able to be graded. We also put in place, and I think a lot of UK universities did this, and I think it was probably a very good thing, they put in place a policy that students would not do any worse in their final grade than they had done in their second year. So if they had been adversely affected by the pandemic in the final couple of months, then they were not going to get a worse grade than they'd done in their second year. Obviously, that does presuppose that, you know, hopefully they'd done reasonably well in their second year, and they're not going to think, oh my goodness, I'm going to end up with that.
What could be your recommendations for any betterment in conducting these online lessons, both for university students as well as school children?
I think what I would pass on is something which our head of division, Andy Unger, at South Bank has made clear to all of us, and that is to keep things clear and simple. There is a huge range of wonderful technological gadgetry, apps, different sort of educational games, and I think those probably all have a role to play, and some are better than others and some are enormously good. But I think the thing for educators is to try to be in control of what you can do, to do things simply, and not to feel overwhelmed by this new online world, which we really didn't think we were going to be inhabiting to anything like this extent even a few months ago. And whilst I receive an inbox of emails with telling me about different sorts of online facilities, I think one has to be quite selective and think essentially what you're doing is still the same. Essentially what you're trying to do is involve your students in the subject, to develop a relationship with your students so that you can communicate with them and they can communicate to you about the subject. Yes, there are all sorts of clever ways that information and knowledge can be accessed now, but the person-to-person approach, whether it is face-to-face or whether it is online, is still something of huge value, and that personal touch, to use a sort of metaphorical word in the online world, should never be underestimated, and in favour of a feeling that you have to use, this particular piece of software or that particular piece of software. And I think it's to remember that essentially connectivity is a wonderful thing, but online connectivity, it is valuable because you're connecting human beings, and that's what is still at the heart of education. It is about a teacher helping a student to make steps in a particular field. And so any particular piece of software or online game or whatever, that's absolutely great, and some of them may be very useful, but they are tools. They're there to be used, but only as an adjunct to that teacher-pupil relationship. Humans are at the heart of all of this, and human connectivity, whether it's face-to-face, as I have the great pleasure of teaching you, or whether it is me now from a wet, cold London talking to you in Bangladesh, which is wonderful and is something that, I didn't imagine that we would be doing, when I had you in my classroom. It's lovely we can do that, but it's the human contact that is at the heart of it all, and we should never forget that, I don't think.
Yes, absolutely. Well, everybody who knows me would know it for a fact that how lucky I feel to be your student. I have always actually spoken about you to all my loved ones, and in fact to my students now, that how helpful you have been throughout my student life and actually my professional life as well. So, I mean, thanks to you, and my heartfelt gratitude to you for all your support throughout my life in London. It wouldn't be the same if I didn't have a teacher like you, a mentor like you at LSBU.
Well, you are very flattering, and I have to say, when somebody asked me recently what was the best thing about being a teacher at LSBU, and I had no hesitation in saying that it was the students, and in particular the students I'm privileged to keep in touch with after they've left, and to see what you have done with your education. I mean, you really are an example. You just don't say no to opportunities. If you see an opportunity and a chance to do something which is interesting, which is useful, and you give a lot of yourself, and you always have, from the time you were at South Bank, quite a number of years ago now, you gave a lot of yourself in student support roles, and you continue that now. It's something that's obviously absolutely central to the person that you are. And I think we all gain a lot when we do give. There's no limit to what you have to give. Giving of yourself is something. It's a pot that refills itself and replenishes. And I think teachers and parents and grandparents all know this. There's they give of themselves to the next generation, and that is a pot that keeps on giving. And I think that you have known that for a very long time. And you know, I take my hat off to you for all that you've done since I've known you, and now, and in the future, I've no doubt.
That's
Yes.
really, really very humbling. I do not kind of know how to react to that coming from you. So thank you so much. That's really, really humbling. I accept it with all my humility. Another thing that was very interesting in news headlines these days, be it on social media or on TV channels and radios, is that UK being opening schools for children. So I'm very interested to know your take on this, because I know there's been kind of mixed opinions from the authorities, from the tutors, from the parents, and from the guardians. So how would you look into it, and what do you think of this schools being open to children?
I think it's very important. I think we've had, I don't know whether everybody listening to this knows that in the UK, like in most of Europe, the academic year starts around about the beginning of September. Some countries start in August, but basically that's about when it starts in September. And I think the children had just had a very long time away from school. I think that teachers did their best during the remainder of the school year, which lasted up till July, to provide a certain amount of tuition, but everything changed so quickly in March that it was very difficult to do more than a sort of a basic amount. And I think children were mostly ready to come back to school. There have been huge changes in the arrangements such that children are being encouraged to stay in their classroom group, so that if there is any infection of the virus, it is not so easily transmitted. It is fairly easily contained in one classroom group. There are huge amounts of practical arrangements to ensure that, to have children from different year groups coming in at different times and in different entrances and playing in different parts of the playground and having their lunches in the classroom and not all together in a big hall. And I think teachers have been working very hard over the summer to actually think through the very little practical details of all of that. And undoubtedly there will have been some children who are, there are some children who are afraid, whether that's that they've just picked up on their parents' fears, their grandparents' fears, fear of what has been going on, whether they've known somebody in their family who's got seriously ill, or whether, you know, there is just a bit of a blanket of fear. Nobody knows how afraid we should all be, because at the moment in lots of parts of the country, the amount of infection has reduced considerably, though there are some towns and cities where there is still quite a lot. And I think we come back to the importance of education, because I think some of their parents have made a point of trying to be as educated as they can about the level of risk. Yes, there is some risk, but it can be managed in certain ways. But there have been parts of even of this country where literacy is at a lower level than it would ideally be, or you have particular parts of the country where there are a lot of people who have come to this country from other parts of the world and whose grasp of English is not as effective as it would ideally be. And then there has been concern that not enough of the health information for those people has been provided in their own languages. So the accurate knowledge and understanding about the levels of risk of the virus and what people should do to mitigate those risks has been, in some places is patchier than it really ideally would be. And it comes back to the importance of literacy, not just amongst our children, but amongst parents, and particularly perhaps grandparents, and I'm talking about there. And so with some children, they have probably not been able to get a realistic assessment of what they need to do to keep as safe as possible, that they should be yes, everyone's going to be worried about the virus, but that they shouldn't be terrified of it, and that if they behave in certain ways, there shouldn't be any need for being absolutely terrified. And I think once those important issues are faced, then children have a thirst to learn. And we've had interviews on the television over the last few days. Children are a little apprehensive, but excited to be getting back into it. They're a bit bored. They want to get on. They want to see their friends. They want to socialize. They want to get on with their lives. And everybody felt that, you know, lives were being put in the deep freeze in March, and they have been to a large extent.
Well,
So
I think children have been most affected during this time because they did not have the understanding of what's going on.
no,
You know,
right.
not being able to go to school or meet their friends or even go to the playground. It's been, I do really feel that it's been really tough
Yes.
for children, especially of those who've been, especially in those households who've been maintaining the social distancing thing. And some of the nations went on to total lockdown where people could not
Yes.
go out for months, etc. So yeah, I mean, I think I should really give it to children and the parents who are actually paying for the last half a year. You've been really home looking after the children, and there's only so much you can do.
Yes, yes. And certainly, again, one comes back to the sad fact that for some families and children, it has been much easier than others. It is much easier for children who live in somewhere where they've got some space that they could go outside their own garden, and where the children have enough room in the house, but where, you know, we have, especially in a lot of the cities, some of the children are living in quite small apartments, and probably several children to a bedroom. And as you say, even though in this country, even at the height of lockdown, most people were allowed to be outside for exercise each day for an hour or so. But certainly, I think in Spain and in Italy, there were weeks or months when children were not even allowed out of an apartment, not even for exercise. That hardly bears thinking about, but nevertheless, it's much easier for children where their house has a garden. They can just go in and out and play and exercise. If they live on the 20th floor of an apartment block, then it's quite, you know, and that they need to be, that they're of an age where they have to be accompanied outside, then their mental health is going to suffer. The mental health of the parents, the mental health of the children, and that all, it feeds in a downward spiral, really. Everybody has been very confined. So I think it is, whilst there are undoubtedly, yes, risks in reopening the schools, there will be some spread of the virus as a result, despite the best of precautions. Nevertheless, it's like taking a cork out of a bottle. You know, the children need their space, the children need their world. Their adults will flourish better because they can concentrate on their own work or home activities properly, rather than feeling that they've got so many things to do. They've got to try to do some work, they've got to try to look after the home, they've got to try to look after the children, and feeling probably that they're not doing anything. And everybody has, you know, there've been a lot of people who've been feeling very inadequate as a result of that, and not through any fault of their own. It's just the way it has, you know, just the way it's been. Yeah.
I think as a closing, I would like to add to that, you know, I think we as adults and also everybody who's responsible, be it in the government levels or in the education level or the NGOs, the INGOs, I think it's time for everybody to collaborate and come up with sustainable research as to how things should be going beyond COVID-19 situation, because I do think now we are opening up. The world is opening up because economies need to open up. But I do feel that it's not like the virus is not there anymore, but it just needs to be, it's just out there. But I think we need to have sustainable solutions to these issues and try to take it like a wake up call. Because in any way, I always thought that, we are all one. The whole world is one. It's like sometimes, when there is probably an oil crisis in Libya, it affects the economy of the US, or
Yes.
there's some recession going on in the UK or in the western part of the world, but probably India is affected, or we are affected in the South Asian countries. So we always had these problems, but probably in our lifetime and in anybody's lifetime, we haven't really seen a global pandemic. And I think my message is that it's like we have people who are going to schools, who are going to private schools, or who are going to government schools, who are better equipped, are comparatively in a better position to actually go on with education, or to maybe they would lose out an academic term or something, but they can manage it. But in community level, like our projects have been shut for so many months, and there were so many because through No Passport Boys, we not only educate children, we also educate teenage girls who never went to school. So they really learn ABCs in their teens, like when they are 13, 14, 15 years old. And one project that we also started in community level is giving education to young mothers who cannot read or write. So those have been going on in small levels and community levels. And at the moment, there's so many families who are affected. But we are starting online teaching for them, to reach out to them as well, which is something we are very excited about. And I do not know how successful we would be, but I'm sure we'll reach there at one point of time. I think the most in the education sector, people who are, as like I mentioned in the start, people, the vulnerable families, the vulnerable children, children with disabilities, they have been affected more. And I think we all need to come together to actually try and process this in our mind, that education really cannot stop for anything as such, like for any matter. You can stop it for some time, but it cannot really go on. It cannot go beyond this. So I think there needs to be proper infrastructural development and kind of research to actually reach out to those areas where there are less internet connectivity, or families who do not have IT support to support them with IT facilities. And yeah, I mean, that's there, and I think that should be taken very, very seriously throughout, like from all of the world, and just not in different parts of the world. So this year's this conversation, Cherry James, thank you so much for being with us. And this is a global celebration of International Literacy Day. And because the theme this year has been literacy, teaching and learning in the COVID-19 crisis and beyond, so I would like to hear from you if you have any global message on literacy, the importance of literacy and education, if you could round it up for us, and any special message for all of us in the developing nations from you.
Well, I really would like to, highlight what you've been saying about the importance of recognizing that this is a global issue. Well, we've got two global issues. We've got the pandemic, which, despite the fact that it has resulted in more border closures and in the growth of nationalization and a sort of sometimes even in one or two countries, a sort of nationalistic approach of we've got a vaccine and we're going to vaccinate, and which really does, I think, sort of undercut everything that's the best scientists really want to achieve, which is to ensure that any vaccine, any treatment is made as available to everybody as it should be. Whilst one of the, as I say, the almost ironic results of this very global pandemic has been border closures, we are absolutely all in this together. nobody had heard of COVID-19 at this time last year. Perhaps it didn't even exist. And in January, when it first emerged, fortunately, the genome of the virus was sequenced, and everybody in the world or scientists who were able to start working on it. So the importance of recognizing that education must be a great leveler and a great leveler up. It is not something that we must take as a privilege and a preserve of any particular countries or of well-off families in any particular in any particular situation. It must be available to all. It's never more necessary that education and knowledge is something which is available for all as it is now. And I think this global pandemic shines a light on that. We need to recognize that we all learn from each other. Scientists certainly are recognizing that around the world. They share their knowledge. The best scientists are sharing their knowledge. There has been more scientific papers published on this and information shared than on any subject, I think, ever before. So whilst there undoubtedly different countries have coped in different ways with this, we are all in it, and this must make us realize two things. One, that we are one world, we are one, but two, the impact of the inequalities that remain in this one world, and the importance of noticing that and of recognizing the potential of education of all sorts, be it scientific, be it literacy, in addressing that and in giving every individual who is an individual, this world is made up of individuals, giving every individual their own chance. And I suppose to come back to the theme of literacy, I mean, what your organization does is wonderful in aiming at different age groups and not just one particular age group, but looking and seeing where there is a need for targeting education for women and girls who have, for whatever reason, education has been absent. And I think it does a wonderful job, and it will go on doing a wonderful job. And yes, you will have had difficulties with carrying out some of the projects over these last few months. An awful lot of education has had that same difficulty, but never forget that this is not something said by me, but something said by, that has been said in the past. We read to know we are not alone. We read to know we are not alone. If we can share that common ability, we are all in this together. And another thing, another saying, again, not by me, but something which I know it sort of resonates. You give a child a meal, you feed them for a day. You give a child a book, you feed them for a week. If you teach a child or an adult to read, you feed them for life. And that is what we need to do. And people need to know, people need to be able to access knowledge and information, not just about the pandemic. Unfortunately, we all need to access what we can to make our informed decisions, but also to access a world of joy out there. And we must remember, and you're right in saying we must, this virus is going to be with us for longer than we want, but there is still a wonderful world out there, and we need to be able to, we want to be able to access it. We want everyone to be able to access it in all sorts of different ways. So thank you so much for inviting me to have this wonderful conversation with you. I have loved talking with you, as I always do when we talk face to face. And I hope we can do that again soon.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you once again for your time. It really is special to all of us at No Passport Voice. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, and I'm sure your words will be thoroughly enlightening for everyone who's listening to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and goodbye for the moment. Bye-bye. Thank you.